Welcome to the Impact stage. As I mentioned, we might take it even one step further from the smart city to circular cities. And I would love to hear from you, where are we there when it comes to circular cities? And maybe one thought I just had when we all turn around, we see the skyline of Frankfurt, maybe for all of us to reflect how much of a city like Frankfurt is already circular. Diane, you want to start with that difficult question, where are we in the world of circular cities?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you so much also for inviting us to be here on this stage. I can talk for Berlin mainly because we are focusing on the city of Berlin. And what I can say is in 2019, as we started with our work, circularity in Berlin was mostly about waste management practices, and this topic really evolved in these 5 years. So the municipalities and the government in Berlin really started to understand this more holistic concept of circularity and circular economy. And when we look at where we are, in the past few years, there have been a lot of funding streams for circular economy practices in SMEs, for businesses, for NGOs, and also research institutions. So I think this topic of circular economy has been kicked off quite well, but we are still in the sphere of exploration, I would say, and research, and not really in the implementation.
Thank you very much. Nora, is that something that you also perceive? Maybe also we would call it the very, very early stages of a new topic like circular cities.
Yes, thank you for inviting me to talk about circular cities. Cradle to Cradle, I would say, is a bit more talking about how cities could have a positive impact by using a circular economy. And therefore, I think it fits quite well to the Impact Festival to talk about it. And we see a lot of municipalities who are actually working on the field of cradle to cradle, implementing it in their cities. There are cities who are actually using it in the building sector. We have cities and municipalities we are working with who are implementing these ideas in their procurement and in also different parts of, for example, event management, and taking these fields really into action. I know that there are we have a network on municipalities who actually want to go for cradle to cradle in their municipality, work on it. Frankfurt is unfortunately not yet part of it, but for example, Cologne, that's not far away from here, is part of our network. And we see that they really know that it's now on the goal that we should actually get there. But I would also go with you that we are not there yet, and we really need a lot to go for. And I think it's really a focus we need to set. And right now we are setting the wrong focus if we are only talking about smart or circularity. I think it's really important that we go away from these ideas of having circularity because we want to be circular, or having climate neutrality because we want to be climate neutral, but really looking on how can we have a positive impact in our work, in our daily life. And that's something, if we set different goals, not being a climate neutral municipality or a circular municipality, but really going on what can we do for having this positive impact. Then we set different we set up a different roadmap, actually, where we want to get. And I think this is really important in this discussion.
And that's maybe also the link to the previous panel. We don't want to have a smart city just because of the sake of being smart, right? There needs to be an end in itself. And maybe the same then with circular cities. So circular cities, not just for the sake of having circular cities. Gerhard, how do you envision that also? What does circular city actually also then mean?
I would second that. So it's not a purpose in and of itself, of course. In the Netherlands, for example, if you look at the official policy goals also of the national government, the purpose is to reduce primary resource use, and the environmental impacts associated with that are the ultimate goal behind it. So the purpose for 2030, for example, is reduce environmental impacts associated with these resource uses by 50%. And I think that's also the way that I would look at this. Circularity is a tool to reduce environmental impacts, potentially actually retrieve economic and financial value, and to change the system through a different design principle. If you look at it from this perspective of impact reduction and come back to your first question, then what I see is that we're really at the start of this transition. There's only a few cities that are actually monitoring it, but if I look at Amsterdam, for example, their latest reports show that they're quite well on their way with climate targets in the sense of Scope 1 and Scope 2 emission reductions, but their goal of reducing Scope 3 emissions also, so the emissions associated with, for example, producing concrete or steel or all these materials that we need in the built environment, that is actually drifting behind, and the trend of that going down is too slow to reach this goal of 50% impact reduction by 2030, for example, which the city has also adopted in line with the national goals.
Yeah.
But don't you think it's like not enough for only being reducing our impact and like having this goal that we reduce our impact as a city if we already have so much bad impact that we need to get to a positive impact?
Yeah, ideally, yes. So we're very, very long way from that, I would say, and it's a bit of a game of timing as well. I think at the moment also with the way things are going, short-term impact reduction has a really big value and urgency in and of itself, and then long-term positive design, let's say, and positive production systems are also, of course, really important. But it's a matter of both, I'd say.
And you just mentioned we're a long way away from that, from the ideal circular city, the ideal circular economy, and we also learned from the previous panel, hard to commit to any years and numbers, but maybe that's something we can think about later as well. What's the time horizon we're talking about, right? We're not just talking about 4 or 5 years, we're probably talking about several decades in this transformation. Just want to come back to the aspects, what constitutes a circular city. So you mentioned the built environment, of course. So again, here everybody can visualize. Frankfurt will hopefully be part then after the Impact Festival. Let's see. No, but it's really the physical stuff that is in a city. But then you mentioned the resources. So Ariana, an important part, right? We have industry in and around cities. It's not just the city center, but the flow of resources, an important factor. What do you see there in that circular city as well?
Well, what I see is definitely that cities don't have knowledge about which material streams are present and flowing in the cities themselves, because also they don't manage those. They manage mainly waste. No, they do waste management, but all the other material flows, they are actually managed by the industry and by businesses, and there's no tool for municipalities and city at the moment really to influence these decisions about value chain. So this is something that is definitely super relevant because, of course, we know there are some methodologies that can be used. I think metabolics are using some, circular economy also in Amsterdam, they have like these circularity gap methodologies. Cradle to cradle, I'm not sure, but there are tools out there,
sure.
And I think these tools are used mainly by NGOs, and they should be provided to cities as well.
Yeah, maybe to jump in here, because that's an interesting point. We've been talking about data when it comes to the transformation of companies. You need to have data available. That situation is getting better, right? Still tricky to have all the data to manage a transformation. Now, what you mentioned is you're in charge of Frankfurt. Do you have the data of what's happening in terms of circularity in the city? This is still a
But also I'm in charge for Berlin, and we are working since many years, and still there's so much intransparency about data in different sectors regarding material flows. We are now working on a project with the Circular Economy Foundation on mapping the textile inbound and outbound flows. So what is important, what is exported, but also what leave the city as waste. And it's very hard to find relatable data, so data that you can use actually to map these flows. And you have to go to so many statistics centers and to so many institutions to just get there. So it's not easy, and definitely also there we would need a centralized methodology, a centralized tool that helps everyone to be able to also map this.
And you mentioned the Circularity Gap Report by Circle Economy. We have one from Munich now as well, where they did the job of mapping material flows in the city. very tricky task.
And-
Yeah.
But also there, I would say it's important that we are not only looking at the end of pipe and looking, okay, where is our waste going, but actually how can cities go on and get like policies in place that we design for circular economy and that we set the standards. Why is there still, why are we now selling photovoltaic? Why are we not actually using them only as a service? And why are we not, as cities, actually working on these fields that we already have? We tell somebody who is building a building that they need to have a PV there. And why are we not actually then also finding ways how to actually circle them already when we are now making the laws to bring them there? So I think it's much more that we need to, we cannot only start with one idea that is quite good, of course, to use solar energy, but then at this one point we are now only, we are doing only always these small steps, and I think we need to make a roadmap to really have a plan where to get, and then these small steps can go, but sometimes these small steps actually go in the wrong direction if we are not having the real goal in mind.
Yeah, I totally agree. What's interesting then when we think about cities, municipalities, smaller municipalities as well, they sometimes lack the capacity to do this, maybe the knowledge. Is that something you see as well, observe as well, Gerhard? Also there, I mean, Amsterdam, then a lot of smaller municipalities around?
I think to a degree, but it's also a problem that is increasingly starting to be tackled, both by the sector and the municipalities themselves, I would say. So I think I do agree with your idea of a systemic approach and really looking ahead and doing a holistically as positive as possible design, of course. But I think these types of material flow analyses and these types of maps basically of the resource flows going in and out of the city. Yeah, it's not just end of pipe. And then all the environmental impacts associated with those are actually quite a good starting point for a complete and comprehensive strategy. And I think getting back to your point on, do you see that cities have the tools or not, or actually lacking the tools or knowledge to do this? I think that's improving. So when I started doing these types of analyses 10 years back, most of them were actually around ultimately agenda setting, making sure the urgency and the impacts behind resource uses were felt. And now I would say I see more and more studies that are not about agenda setting or awareness raising, which the GAP reports still do to a large extent, and very they do it very well, I would say, but also about actual implementation and getting the data and the knowledge that's at a level that you can actually start using it. So getting back to an example for the built environment, you could map the materials and the impacts behind them statically, but we're also at the stage now where many parties in the industry, and not just metabolic, are able to provide the city with an actual live dashboard of what happens as a result of their demolition, renovation, construction activities, the permits that they hand out. That's like one information point. If you couple them to models of the materials that go into the built environment or are released upon demolition, and then you start to look for private and public partnerships that reuse these material flows, then you get to a much more practical level. And I think the interesting point that this transition is in at the moment is that the data sets needed and also the software tools needed to unlock these ways of working, they're really beginning to emerge at scale, which wasn't the case 5, 6, 7 years ago. Yep. So that provides, I think, a really positive perspective and hopefully allows us also to actually see change on the ground through these types of analysis rather than just seeing awareness and agenda setting through these types of analysis.
Yeah, totally.
And also talking about, I mean, you ask for knowledge and implementation. There are so many great examples out there. And so what we did is writing guidebooks on these great examples. I mean, for example, we did one big project called Laboratory Tempelhof in Berlin, where we had like these huge events with 60,000 people, with the German band Die Ärzte and Die Toten Hosen, like famous big bands, and to show that this is already possible to make this in a different way. And then actually, but not showing it, but actually writing it down and showing how you can actually manage to make this the same way or even better. Mm-hmm. And we have now cities, for example, Mainz, and the marketing part of Mainz, who actually came to us and they copied it and they made like a big example in their city, but they just did it without us because they could just use it. And I think it's really important that we give municipalities the chance to just copy it. We did that with buildings, for example, as well, and with procurement, because it's so important that, like you said, there is also a lack of people who could actually do it. I mean, talking about smaller municipalities, we see that they don't have the capacity to figure out all of this themselves. But if they have a guidebook and they can just implement it, then it makes it a bit easier. It's not, I don't want to say it's easy then, but at least a bit easier though.
Is that a way that you really see that replication approaches need to be one of the game changers, or what are the other game changers out there?
Absolutely, replication is very important. At Circular Berlin, we also focus on open source solutions. So everything what we do from our website and all the graphics on our website and logo to studies and publications, they should be accessible and replicable by others. That's definitely a very important point. I think that of having a vision, a very long-term vision, is also a big problem for cities. A city like Berlin, which is also a federal state, also has two governments sitting there, and politics can change a lot in terms of how much data and analysis are then implemented in the reality in like concrete examples. So I believe that having like more long-term plans that goes beyond these like 4 or 5 years of government's rounds it would be very important. And this is the role of cities and municipalities actually to set this discourse and set the agenda and set the vision for everybody, and actually also lead by example. And implement themselves, start from themselves to implement circularity in all their activities. That's so much that they own, like urban planning, for example, that's now is directly managed by the CDO, but even like looking at food sector or textiles, now that's so much that they can implement in their catering and really show the way. And but that starts from education. So we need to have people working in municipalities that are actually educated, that understand what circular economy is, so that they can apply this to their own role and capabilities and responsibilities.
But is that really happening, the educational part, when it comes to municipalities? Because I see that as a multiplier effect, ideally, right? You have a few players out there, players like you doing the job, you have a few cities taking the lead. How is that trickle down actually happening? Is that happening? Or is that a gap? I mean, could be fine to say,
no,
right?
I mean, that's what we also do, and we have a lot of municipalities who actually come to us, and we see that we have this network of maybe 20 municipalities who are now in there and actually show that they already are in the front and who are actually really implementing a lot of these ideas. But also we, for example, now are having a summit on only for municipalities in like 2 weeks. So of course you can join. And there we already have 200 municipalities who come to this event and actually want to be part of this and learn from each other. And we see that there's a really big interest. But of course, it's always on capacity questions. We also see that it's difficult for them then to take this and to get all their people on board, because there's already too much to do in the municipalities. And then they see, okay, where can I get this if I have to put it on top? And that's why, of course, we need to get a different understanding that it should not be something on top, but it should be something that is already thought with all our ideas we have.
Yeah.
Because if we have this thinking in mind, then of course probably a lot of problems we are tackling are actually in a different, answered in a different way than it is now.
Absolutely. Maybe then again, what you mentioned before, the best practices also help that people see it and make it concrete. We heard one example with Labor Tempelhof in Berlin. I hope everybody has been at Tempelhof, huge area, right? Gerd Weiss, also in the Netherlands, it feels like Netherlands is playing an important role in that transformation. A lot of different players there, also then circular economy mentioned, City of Amsterdam, in Rotterdam is a lot happening when it comes to smart cities, then circular cities. What are good examples there also to look at?
Well, I think, so first there's the things like Ariane also mentioned with what do you control directly? Urban planning, tendering for new developments, public procurement and the services and the products that you use, but also perhaps carbon accounting next to financial accounting, and how do you monitor actually the impact of the city? I think those are all, and we have a tradition of relatively strong government in the Netherlands in the sense of also wanting to control really this planning cycle in a good way, and wanting to push the construction sector in that sense also to use sustainable materials, and that fits the culture, I would say, also of municipalities there. So I think that direct push is a really important one. I would say another really important factor is creating physical spaces where you can also have the experiments and have the startups and the scale-ups that you want for this new economy. So to find relatively affordable places for startups and scale-ups to host their offices, things like that. That's a really big push. And maybe a third is the way that the private sector and the public sector collaborate. If I just look, for example, at our collaboration with a city like Amsterdam, that's not just about me being a consultant, getting an assignment from the city, doing it, whether it's an analysis or a training program or whatever else, and then moving on to the next, this very traditional relationship. But it's much more, especially after you collaborate for a while, it's much closer in the sense that you start to look for, okay, what's the European funding we need to do a really big program, and can we reel that in together? What is the ecosystem of companies that we would really like to change their production processes or the services delivered, and how can we start to trigger that? And I see a combination in the Netherlands of still relying also on experts and external experts, but also slowly building the capacity in the municipal organization themselves to work in a different way. And that's very concretely meant, for example, that many of my colleagues, and most of them have a background in environmental sciences or industrial ecology, so really this different way of thinking that's very related to circular economy and cradle-to-cradle types of principles, for them to be hired by these cities so that actually they also grow the capacity to solve questions themselves and to change the way that they work themselves fundamentally. And I think that's really important for the long term. It's a bit of an anti-pitch, let's say, for my own workflow perhaps, but there's so much we have to do that the only way to scale and create structural change is also if you actually do capacity building and not just training in the municipal organizations themselves. And I think that's really important for the long term.
In all around. And maybe one point, sorry, from your first points, to have that strong government, strong municipal body. I think that's super important, because if we all think about different cities, and again, I think I like to visualize, one city that comes to mind is Paris, being very, very progressive. Strong government, or like, let's say, the mayor, very strong personalities who have that big vision. We have other cities, maybe then in the Netherlands, where you see this strong vision. Maybe also we have to accept that in some cities we won't see that. And how do you handle that then as well? How do you perceive this? Also, Berlin, do you feel that is something where you need to push them, where you also be pushed and pulled?
Yeah, definitely. Many aspects we have to push. I think if we look at the important stakeholder groups, they all need to be pushed. Now, if we look, we have the businesses, we have of course, the government and municipality, we have the NGOs, the activists, we have like the consumers, and there's a lot to be pushed there. I think also cities, they don't engage enough with citizens. So that's something that needs to be explored. We need more surveys, like where we understand why circular solutions, for example, are not used, that are already there. So in Berlin, we have this huge ecosystem of circular solutions. Alone, what we mapped is over 200 businesses that are working in this sense and providing solutions to final consumers or B2B. And many consumers, many citizens, they don't use this solution because maybe they don't know them, or maybe they perceive them as too expensive, or they don't get access to this. And that's something is also a knowledge gap from the municipalities and the city that has to be covered. And you can only cover if you create a dialogue and a long-term commitment to better understand what is needed and what has to be implemented, because otherwise we also risk to implement solutions that then nobody will use, and that would be a shame.
I would really like to add, I think there's not only a knowledge gap, but a doing gap. And actually, I think we can really learn a lot from the Netherlands there, because we saw that there are municipalities in the Netherlands who just did something. And in Germany, we are always thinking everything through for like years. And then there's a new government there in place, and actually then they need to think it through as well, because it's not their idea, so they need to implement their idea. And that makes it really slow and really difficult. And when we see, for example, in cities like Venlo, over 10 years ago, here, nobody was talking in Germany about circularity. And in Venlo, they just said, yeah, we are just implementing cradle to cradle now. We're just doing it. And we are building capacities and doing it. And they built the Floriade, they made it in cradle to cradle way. They built a city hall in cradle to cradle. They built a lot of buildings, and then they also made like a huge project to implement it in the city. They made a cradle to cradle year and started like doing all of this. And they also made it as a focus not only for being more sustainable, but being an attractive city people want to go to. Companies want to go there and have people there. Actually, also people are not moving away, especially young people are not moving away anymore, but they find this attractive and they stay, or they even move to that city. And to see that this could also be a part of an economic idea and of a business idea, and not only, well, we need to be sustainable in some way, and now we're implementing something, but we're not actually changing the thinking that it makes sense to do so. And for example, in Venlo, the whole municipality, the whole parliament was voting for doing it from all parties, because everyone could see the benefit in it. It made sense in a business way. It made sense for the environment. It made sense in social aspects. And to actually show that this makes sense for everyone, and of course then there's no reason not to do so, but actually not talking about this knowledge gap only, but actually being a bit more like the Netherlands, just doing something instead of only talking about it.
And maybe one dimension that we could add there is the health aspect and the quality of life aspect. That should be a great argument for a circular and healthy city. Maybe still there's a cultural difference then between the Netherlands and Germany, something that we learned. Even Venlo, if you all know where Venlo is, that's probably 10 minutes from the German border, so that shouldn't be too far away in terms of culture. But interesting example here. You mentioned these solutions, and I think that's still an interesting point to think about. Even if you talk about how do you transform a city, that depends on a lot of other stakeholders that actually provide solutions, whether that's in textile, whether that's in automotive, whatever the core industries are. And you said, oh, they are there in Berlin, we have mapped more than 200. But isn't that really a thing? We talk a lot about scale, but if we are really honest with ourselves, these solutions are still way, way too small to be visible here. I mean, how much, or is that the case? Gerard, do you see that?
With the built environment, I wouldn't say so. For example, it's perfectly viable now that cross-laminated timber has really come up as a solution, right? Instead of concrete, this could all be done in wood, even the high rises these days. Of course, there's a cost picture to it that's not quite the same yet as the conventional building materials, but I don't see a technological issue in that sense for scaling up change to the way that we design and materialize buildings, just to name one example.
Okay.
And I think that could be a really visible one and something that you could see quite immediately taking effect. And I think in many cities you also see that happening. It's not, it's still rare in the Netherlands. I think if you're talking about cultural differences, we have a very strong culture of bricks and clay and all of those types of building materials. So aesthetically, people still like that, and we're not used to wood like they might be in Copenhagen or in other Scandinavian cities. In Sweden, of course, especially Copenhagen still has a lot of brick. But I think the technology is there, and for many industries, I think, and also our food systems, for example, we know what the solutions are. It's mostly about getting them implemented. The political will or the financial systems are usually a bigger barrier, I would say, than the technology or finding the right type of solution.
But maybe then to reframe the question a little bit, so the technologies then in most fields, I would agree. You mentioned also textile, but then theoretically the technology is there, practically the solutions are not available at scale. Is that maybe the difference?
Well, if I can add on this, not all the solutions they need to be available on scale. There are solutions, for example, for consumers that can be very small, starting from a tailoring shop that is repairing your clothes so that you can wear them longer. So it's also about making these solutions visible. How can cities make this solution visible for their citizens so that they can access them and use them more easily? So definitely there are some tools there, even just like online digital mappings. And but they always have to be linked also with marketing campaigns, which cities, at least in Germany, they tend not to spend money into. No? They create, they push these tools and at the beginning, but then, of course, it needs a long-term kind of commitment in supporting this kind of visibility in this kind of platforms. So I think the technologies are definitely there. The small solutions are also there, but we need to connect A to B, and sometimes this is also difficult. No? And sometimes for cities, they are super open to be matchmaked with solution providers, but then somehow they don't get to the point to really like implement. And I think in that process, they still need to be guided a lot.
But talking about textiles, for example, I think cities can so easily start with their procurement, for example, to have their textiles in a cradle-to-cradle way. They're already there. And also, like if you look at big hospitals, for example, they're already implemented cradle-to-cradle textiles in their hospital textiles. So actually, it is there, and they now need just to change it. And I think it's not that it's not possible even in scaling, and that would be a huge impact.
Maybe a small but important addition, I think, is aside from visibility and even direct procurement and marketing, is also the influence of national and European policy. Like if you think about what drives change in the built environment, I think national building codes, for example, are in the Netherlands a bigger driver than most other initiatives that I can think of. There's a cap, just a maximum cap of environmental impact per square meter gross floor surface that you're allowed to design in, and a system behind it. There's lots of, let's say, ifs and buts and flaws with the system, but it's an LCA-based capped impact system that slowly, if you sharpen it, pushes the market in the right direction in terms of innovation without prescribing the specific solution. I think we all see the impact of CSRD on the private sector and the way that many companies run. So I think the influence that policy can have, especially when you also dare to be normative sometimes and really create quite strong game rules, I think is not to be underestimated. And that can also be for cities quite an important leverage point. Like, can you either lobby for stronger national or European norms, or find a way where you can be a front runner and show what's possible already at the local level so that the national norms can follow your example? These are really good questions to ask.
then you are on the side of the most progressive players in that field, right? Who then also start really shaping the norms.
Yeah.
I think we're coming slowly to an end. I think there were a lot of really interesting, important aspects, how cities can shape into circular cities. That is probably a long way, right? Still, we're talking about many, many years into the future that we see solutions out there. The visibility is important. Public procurement, I think definitely a topic we should spend separate time to discuss about this. How does that actually work? How could it work? Is this really the big game changer? What needs to happen there? I think with this, I would say thank you very much to all of you. Happy to come visit you in Berlin, Amsterdam, and take a look how that's going to transform. And then let's hope Frankfurt will be part of the network soon. And with this, thank you very much to my panel, Ariana, Nora, and Gerard. Thank you for being here. Thanks to all of you. And this is your applause. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.